The traveler's pulse quickened. What was this voice? And what truth was it referring to? He felt an overwhelming need to understand, to uncover the secrets that had been hidden beneath the ocean for so long. He clutched the tablet tightly, his heart racing with anticipation. The scene around him began to blur, the ocean's waves growing louder and more forceful. He was being pulled deeper into the dream, deeper into the mystery of Atlantis. The soft voice continued to speak, its tone both warning and beckoning. The crystal that once powered our civilization, the voice said, was not the only thing we left behind. There are other secrets hidden in the ruins of Atlantis, secrets that hold the power to change the world. But these secrets are not for the faint of heart. They come with a price. The traveler's thoughts raced as the water began to rise, engulfing the ruins of Atlantis. But instead of drowning him, the water seemed to lift him, carrying him downward into the depths. He was no longer standing on the shore. He was now beneath the waves, sinking deeper and deeper into the heart of the lost city. As he descended, the murky water around him cleared, revealing the remnants of the city in all their forgotten glory. Broken columns, shattered statues, and cracked walls adorned with faded murals lined the streets. The faint glow of bioluminescent fish lit the way as the traveler moved through the submerged city, his heart heavy with the realization that this was not just the past, this was a living, breathing memory, still echoing beneath the waves. He passed through what had once been the grand marketplace, now overtaken by sea creatures and coral. The once gleaming buildings were now shells of their former selves, their golden surfaces tarnished by centuries of salt water. Yet, despite the decay, there was an undeniable beauty in the way the sea had claimed the city. It was as if Atlantis had become one with the ocean, its legacy preserved in the depths, waiting to be uncovered by those who sought its truth. And then he saw it a structure standing tall amidst the ruins. It was the palace, the very heart of Atlantis, now a shadow of its former self. Its walls were cracked, its columns broken, but it still stood, a silent sentinel guarding the secrets of a civilization that had once ruled the world. The traveler swam toward it, his movements slow and deliberate. As he approached the entrance, he felt a strange pull, as if the palace itself were calling him inside. He swam through the broken doors into the grand hall that had once been filled with the sounds of life and power. Now it was silent. The only sound, the faint echo of his own breathing. At the center of the hall stood a pedestal, and on it the traveler saw something that took his breath away, a glowing crystal, similar to the one he had seen in the palace before. But this crystal was different. It was not the heart of Atlantis, but rather the key to understanding its true legacy. The crystal was the final piece of the puzzle, the last secret hidden beneath the waves. The voice spoke again, this time clearer than before. This is the heart of our knowledge, it said. It holds the wisdom of Atlantis, the power to change the world. But it is not for the unworthy. Only those who are willing to face the consequences of their actions can unlock its secrets. The traveler reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the crystal. As he did, he felt a surge of energy course through him, a connection to something ancient and powerful. It was as if he had touched the very soul of Atlantis, and in that moment he understood. The power that had once fueled the civilization was still here, hidden beneath the ocean, waiting for someone to find it. But the price of unlocking its secrets was not one to be taken lightly. The crystal began to glow brighter, and the water around the traveler seemed to pulse with energy. For a moment, he felt as though he were drowning, the power of the crystal overwhelming him. But then, as quickly as it had come, the sensation passed, and he was left floating in the silence of the ruins. The traveler knew that this was only the beginning. The true legacy of Atlantis, with all its knowledge and power, was waiting to be uncovered. But the journey was far from over, and the consequences of awakening the city's secrets would be far-reaching. As the water began to pull him back toward the surface, the traveler felt a deep sense of peace. He had found the heart of Atlantis, but the story was far from finished. There was still much to learn and much to uncover before he could understand the full truth of the lost civilization. The waves gently lapped against the shore as the traveler awoke once more on the quiet beach. The sound of the ocean filling his ears. He could still feel the pull of the submerged city beneath the waves, the crystal that had glowed with such ancient power, and the voice that had warned him of the consequences of unlocking its secrets. His heart raced as he thought of what lay beneath the ocean: knowledge, power, and the weight of a civilization that had once ruled the world, only to fall into ruin. For a moment, the traveler stood still, letting the cool breeze wash over him. He could still feel the pressure of the dream pressing against his mind, as though the answers he sought were just beyond his reach. The secrets of Atlantis were there, waiting for him to uncover them, but he knew that the journey was far from over. The whispers of the ocean seemed to call to him once again, and without a second thought, the traveler closed his eyes, willing himself to return to the depths where Atlantis had once thrived. The sound of the waves grew louder, and when he opened his eyes, he was no longer on the beach. The ocean surrounded him, its vast expanse stretching out in every direction. The submerged ruins of Atlantis lay before him once more, but this time, the city felt different, alive with an energy that seemed to hum through the water. The traveler dove into the depths, moving with purpose toward the ruins. As he swam through the water, the familiar columns, broken statues, and faded murals passed by. The ocean had claimed the city, but the spirit of Atlantis still lingered in the ruins, like a memory waiting to be remembered. He arrived at the grand palace, the once glorious structure, now a shadow of its former self, half buried in the sand and coral. The door, broken and shattered by time, was wide open, as though inviting him inside. The air was thick with the weight of history, and the traveler could feel the presence of something ancient, something that had been waiting for centuries to be discovered. The pedestal where the crystal had once stood was now empty. The traveler's heart skipped a beat. The glowing crystal that had held the knowledge of Atlantis was gone. For a moment, he felt a pang of loss had he missed the opportunity to unlock the secrets of the city. Had the crystal been taken, or had it simply vanished? He swam through the ruins, searching for any sign of the crystal or the power that had once fueled the civilization. His fingers brushed against the cold stone of the walls, tracing the faded symbols that adorned them. The murals told a story, one of power, knowledge, and destruction. But it was a story left unfinished, a chapter still to be written. The traveler moved deeper into the palace, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had seen and learned. Atlantis had been a civilization, unlike any other, a beacon of wisdom and achievement. But in the end, it had been consumed by its own ambition, its reliance on a power that had been both its gift and its curse. As he moved toward the back of the palace, he noticed something strange. A door, hidden behind a tapestry of woven seaweed and coral, stood ajar. The traveler approached it cautiously, unsure of what he might find beyond. His heart beat faster as he pushed the door open, revealing a hidden chamber, a chamber that had not been touched by the passage of time. Inside. The air was thick with the scent of salt water and something else, something ancient, like the earth itself. The walls of the chamber were adorned with strange symbols, runes that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, but this pedestal was different from the one in the throne room. It was carved from a single piece of obsidian, its surface smooth and dark as the depths of the ocean. And on top of it, resting like a forgotten treasure, was a small, intricately carved box. The traveler approached the pedestal, his fingers trembling as he reached for the box. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, beautiful and mysterious. Its surface adorned with symbols he could not understand. He could feel the weight of it in his hands, as though it carried the memories of an entire civilization. Slowly, he lifted the box, and as he did, a strange sensation washed over him like a ripple in the fabric of time itself. The voice spoke again, its tone softer now, almost gentle. "You have found it," it said. "The final secret of Atlantis. But be warned, for to open this box is to awaken what has been dormant for centuries." The traveler felt a chill run down his spine. What was inside the box? And why had it been hidden for so long? He hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on his chest. But curiosity, that insatiable pull that had brought him here, urged him to open the box. He slowly lifted the lid, his hands shaking as he revealed the contents inside. First, there was nothing, just empty space, like a void. But then, as his eyes adjusted, he saw it. A small crystal, glowing with an inner light. It was not like the crystal he had seen before. It was smaller, more delicate, but it seemed to hum with the same ancient power. As he gazed at it, he felt the same energy he had felt when he first touched the larger crystal. It was the same power, but different, more focused, more contained. As though this crystal held the key to unlocking the true legacy of Atlantis. He reached out and gently picked up the crystal, feeling its warmth in his hands. As he did, the chamber around him seemed to come alive. The walls shimmered, and the symbols on them began to glow, as though the crystal was unlocking something deep within the stone. The air grew thick with energy, and the traveler felt a surge of power coursing through him, as though the knowledge of Atlantis itself was flowing into him. The voice spoke once more, but this time there was a sense of finality in its tone. "You have awakened the heart of Atlantis," it said. "The knowledge that has been lost for centuries is now yours to command. But remember this, power comes with a price. The knowledge you now hold is not meant for all. Use it wisely." As the traveler held the crystal, he understood. The secrets of Atlantis were no longer buried beneath the waves, they were within him, a part of him now. The knowledge of a civilization that had once reached the pinnacle of power was at his fingertips, but the burden of that knowledge, the weight of the choices he would have to make, was something he had not fully grasped until now. The power of Atlantis had been awakened, but at what cost? The traveler woke again on the quiet beach, the cool sand beneath his fingers grounding him to reality. The echo of the dream still reverberated in his mind. The crystal, its power, and the voice that warned him of the consequences had all become part of him now. He could still feel the weight of it, the ancient energy that had surged through him when he held the crystal. It was not just knowledge, it was something more, something deeper, and something far more dangerous. As the ocean's waves gently caressed the shore, the traveler stood, feeling a sense of urgency building within him. What would he do with the power he had unlocked, the wisdom of Atlantis? The knowledge of a civilization that had once shaped the world was now at his fingertips. But the voice had warned him knowledge came with a price. What was that price? And could he, truly, control it? The whisper of the ocean seemed to call to him again, and the pull was irresistible. He closed his eyes and let the sound of the waves guide him back to the depths, back to the ruins of Atlantis. As he descended into the water, the familiar city rose before him, its once grand buildings now a shadow beneath the waves. The crystal he had discovered lay heavy in his hands, its warmth radiating through his fingers, and he felt the power of Atlantis coursing through him once more. But this time, the city was different. It was no longer just a place of ancient wonders. It was alive with the energy of the crystal, pulsing with the force of the knowledge that had been unlocked. The very ruins of Atlantis seemed to tremble, as though the city itself were awakening from a long slumber. The traveler swam through the streets, his heart pounding as he approached the grand palace. The walls, once faded and broken, now seemed to shimmer with life, as though the city's essence had been revived by the power of the crystal. He moved through the empty halls, his mind racing with the weight of the decisions he would soon have to make. The knowledge he now possessed was unlike anything he had ever imagined, so vast, so all-encompassing. It was tempting, a lure that promised power beyond comprehension. He arrived at the throne room, where the crystal had once sat at the heart of the palace. The pedestal that had held it was now empty, the glow of the stone gone. But the traveler knew that the power was still here within him, and within the ruins themselves. It was then that he saw the figure standing at the far end of the room. It was the old king of Atlantis, the one who had warned him of the consequences of their civilization's ambition. His expression was grim, his eyes dark with a sorrow that seemed to transcend time. The king's robes shimmered with the faint glow of the crystal's power, but his face was weary, as though he had seen too much. The traveler approached the king, his heart heavy with the weight of his newfound knowledge. "You have returned," the king said softly, his voice carrying a sense of inevitability. "I knew you would. The crystal has chosen you, just as it chose me so long ago." The traveler felt a chill run through him. "What do you mean?" he asked. The king's gaze grew distant, as though he were reliving the past. "The power of Atlantis was always meant to be a gift," he said. "A gift that would elevate our people to the stars, that would bring peace, knowledge, and prosperity to the world. But we were blinded by our own ambition. We thought we could control it, that we could bend the forces of nature to our will." He paused, his eyes darkening. "But the power we wielded came at a cost. The crystal is not just a source of knowledge, it is a force unto itself, an energy that cannot be contained. It is a living thing, and it will always seek to grow, to expand. Those who control it are not masters, they are its servants, and it will consume them if they are not careful." The traveler's mind raced. "So, what happened?" he asked, his voice trembling. "How did Atlantis fall?" The king's expression grew pained. "We became too reliant on the crystal," he said. "We used it to fuel our cities, to control nature, to shape the very fabric of the world. But we didn't realize that the power we were drawing from, it was destroying the balance. The land began to wither, the rivers ran dry, and the very earth we depended on began to crumble beneath us. The gods, who had once blessed us, turned their gaze away, and in the end we were left with nothing but ruins." The traveler's heart sank. The king's words echoed in his mind. Atlantis had fallen because its people had tried to control a power that was beyond them. And now he had inherited that very power. Could he control it? Or would he, too, be consumed by it? "You see now," the king said, his voice heavy with regret, "the cost of knowledge. The crystal gives power, but it also demands sacrifice. It is not a gift to be taken lightly. You must decide what you will do with it. Will you use it to rebuild Atlantis, or will you let it consume you, just as it consumed us?" The traveler felt a surge of conflicting emotions. The power of Atlantis, the knowledge it contained, was his to wield. But with it came the risk of repeating the mistakes of the past. He could feel the crystal's energy pulsing in his hands, urging him to act, to take control of his destiny. But at what cost? As the king's form began to fade into the shadows, he left the traveler with one final warning. Remember, the power to change the world is in your hands. But true power lies not in controlling others, but in understanding the balance of nature. You must use this gift wisely. The traveler stood in silence, the weight of the decision pressing on his chest. He had unlocked the secrets of Atlantis, but now he faced a choice that would determine the fate of not only himself but the world. The power of the crystal was his, but so was the responsibility that came with it. As the ruins of Atlantis seemed to dissolve into mist, the traveler knew that his journey was far from over. The legacy of Atlantis, with all its wisdom and its warning, was now his to carry. And with that knowledge came the burden of making the right choice. The night was still, the ocean quiet, as the traveler stood on the edge of the shore, contemplating the gravity of the king's words. The wind seemed to carry the weight of centuries, swirling around him as though the very earth itself was urging him to make a decision. He could feel the pulse of the crystal in his hand, a constant reminder of the power he now wielded. But with that power came responsibility in the faintest whisper of doubt. Atlantis had once stood at the pinnacle of human achievement. It had been a civilization of unparalleled knowledge and prosperity, but it had fallen, consumed by its own ambition, by its desire to control a force too great for any mortal to wield. The traveler knew this truth now, deep in his bones. And yet, as he looked at the crystal, he couldn't shake the feeling that Atlantis' legacy was not one of failure, but of potential that could either rebuild the world or tear it apart. The traveler closed his eyes and breathed in deeply, letting the salt air fill his lungs. The decision he faced was more than just a choice between power and restraint. It was a question of whether he would repeat history's mistakes or forge a new path, one that could bring balance to the knowledge and energy he now held. The waves seemed to whisper to him, urging him toward the water. Without a word, he began to walk, his feet sinking into the wet sand, and soon he was wading into the surf, the cool water lapping against his ankles. With each step, the world around him seemed to shift. The stars above blurred, the ocean grew darker, and the ruins of Atlantis rose before him once more, their shadows stretching toward the horizon. He was no longer just a visitor to the lost city. This time, he had returned to the heart of it, to the palace, to the pedestal where the power of Atlantis had once thrived. The ruins were quiet now, their once grand walls now covered in a blanket of coral and seaweed. The crystal still pulsed faintly in his hand, its energy both alluring and unnerving. As he stepped into the throne room, the silence was deafening. There was no king, no elders, no voices of wisdom to guide him, only the remnants of a great civilization now lying in ruins. The traveler approached the pedestal where the crystal had once been placed. It was still empty, but the weight of what had been lost, what had been sacrificed, was all around him. He closed his eyes once more and felt the pulse of the crystal inside his hand. the power of Atlantis flowing through him. In that moment, he understood something deeply. Power, in its purest form, was neither good nor evil. It was a force of nature, like the ocean itself, capable of both creation and destruction, of bringing life or tearing it apart. The question was never whether power could be controlled. The question was whether the wielder could control themselves. The traveler thought back to the king's warning. Could he control this power? Could he use it to rebuild the world, or would he, too, be consumed by it? What choice would he make? He stepped forward and placed the crystal on the pedestal, watching as the energy within it seemed to radiate outward, filling the room with a soft, shimmering light. The air around him hummed with life, as though the city itself were waking from its slumber. But the traveler knew better than to believe in illusions. He knew that this moment, this choice, would determine everything. The voice spoke again, this time more clearly than before. It was not the king's voice, nor was it the whisper of the ocean. It was something deeper, something ancient. The time has come, the voice said, to choose. Will you embrace the legacy of Atlantis, with all its power and potential, or will you reject it, letting the world remain as it is, without the knowledge that could transform it? The traveler's heart raced as he felt the weight of the decision press upon him. The power of Atlantis, the knowledge, the energy was now his to wield. But it was also a burden he would carry for the rest of his life. Was he ready for that? Was anyone truly ready for such responsibility? He looked at the crystal, its glow soft and constant. The light seemed to pulse with his heartbeat, as though it were waiting for his decision, waiting for him to unlock its secrets and unleash its power in the silence of the throne room. He made his choice. I choose balance, the traveler whispered, his voice steady but filled with the weight of his decision. He stepped back, his eyes fixed on the crystal, and placed his hands at his sides. In that moment, he made the decision to not use the crystal to dominate or control, but to preserve the balance of nature, to use the wisdom of Atlantis to heal the world, not conquer it. The power of Atlantis could change the world, but it could only do so if the wielder understood that such power was never meant to be used for personal gain, but for the greater good. As the words left his lips, the crystal began to glow brighter, its light enveloping the room in a soft, golden hue. The walls of the throne room shimmered, and the ruins of the palace seemed to come alive once more, not in grandeur, but in a quiet, peaceful way. The once broken columns were now whole again, the murals on the walls coming to life with the stories of Atlantis' rise and fall. The energy of the crystal seemed to reach out to the world beyond, spreading peace and balance, just as the traveler had hoped. The traveler closed his eyes and felt the pulse of the crystal within him. The knowledge of Atlantis, its wisdom and its warning, now flowed through him like a river, steady and strong. He could feel the balance he had chosen, the balance between power and restraint, between ambition and humility. And he knew, deep in his soul, that this was the right choice. The power of Atlantis could either save the world or destroy it. But it was the choices of those who wielded that power that determined its fate. As the light from the crystal began to fade, the traveler opened his eyes and took one last look at the ruins of Atlantis. The city had fallen once, but now it had been reborn, not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of what could be achieved when knowledge was used with wisdom. With a final glance at the pedestal, the traveler turned and walked toward the open door. The ocean's waves beckoned him forward, the journey far from over. But as he left the ruins behind, he carried with him not just the knowledge of Atlantis, but the understanding that power, in the end, was not just about control it was about responsibility. The soft murmur of the ocean greeted the traveler once more as he stepped onto the beach, the dawn's first light casting a gentle glow on the horizon. The weight of the decision he had made still lingered in his chest, but there was a new sense of peace within him. The crystal, its energy now flowing in harmony with the world, had fulfilled its purpose. The power of Atlantis had been tempered, its destructive potential curbed by the wisdom of restraint. The sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, as if the world itself were acknowledging the traveler's choice. Atlantis, in a way, had been reborn, not as a city of unchecked power, but as a symbol of balance and hope. And with that hope came a new understanding. The legacy of Atlantis was not just in its grand architecture, its vast knowledge, or even its forgotten crystallite was in the lessons it had taught, both through its rise and its fall. The traveler walked slowly along the beach, reflecting on the journey he had undertaken. What had begun as a search for knowledge, for answers to the mysteries of the past, had turned into a profound journey of self-discovery. Atlantis had shown him that true power was not about controlling the world or bending nature to one's will. True power lay in understanding the delicate balance that existed between all things. He paused at the water's edge, his feet sinking into the wet sand. The ocean before him was vast, its surface reflecting the sky above, calm and endless. And yet, beneath that surface, there were mysteries waiting to be uncovered, lessons waiting to be learned. The world was still full of secrets, and the traveler knew that his journey was far from over. But now he carried a different kind of knowledge. He carried the wisdom of Atlantis, the knowledge that had been lost for so long, the wisdom that had nearly destroyed a civilization. He understood now that knowledge, in the wrong hands, could be a dangerous thing, but in the right hands, it could bring about healing, understanding, and balance. The traveler turned away from the water and began walking inland. There were people in the world who needed the knowledge he had gained, but not just the knowledge. Of Atlantis, he had learned the importance of humility, of understanding, and of using power with wisdom. There was much work to be done, but he was ready for it. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The world was a vast and complicated place, and there would be challenges along the way. But the lessons of Atlantis would guide him as he walked. The city of Atlantis seemed to fade into the distance, the ruins now a peaceful part of the ocean's embrace. But the spirit of the city remained alive in the traveler, in the wisdom he had chosen to carry forward. The crystal's light had faded, but the energy it had released would never be extinguished. It had become part of the world, part of the balance he had sought to restore. And so the traveler continued his journey, knowing that the legacy of Atlantis was not just in the past, it was in the future, in the choices that people would make, in the wisdom they would choose to carry with them. The world was still full of mystery, full of untold stories. And now, with the wisdom of Atlantis as his guide, the traveler was ready to uncover them. The traveler stood at the edge of the ocean once more, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sky met the sea. The sun had now fully risen, casting golden rays across the vast expanse of water, illuminating the path that lay ahead. The winds were gentle, carrying with them the scent of salt and the promise of a new day. The ruins of Atlantis, now just a distant memory, had faded from view, but the echoes of its wisdom, its rise, and its fall lingered in the traveler's heart. He had learned the hardest lessons, lessons that would shape not just his future, but the future of those who would inherit the world after him. The knowledge of Atlantis was no longer a dangerous power to be controlled, but a gift to be respected. In the silence of the ocean, in the stillness of the dawn, the traveler understood that true wisdom was not about hoarding power or knowledge. It was about sharing it with humility, using it to heal, to balance, and to nurture the world, rather than to dominate it. As he turned to face the world ahead, he saw it differently now. Every tree, every river, every mountain and valley seemed to pulse with life, as though all of nature was connected in a delicate web, a web that could easily unravel if not cared for. The legacy of Atlantis, with all its grandeur and mistakes, had taught him this. Power is not a force to be feared, but one to be understood. It is neither good nor evil. It is simply a force of nature, and like all forces, it must be wielded. With great care, he felt the weight of the crystal still within him, its energy now a part of his soul. It no longer pulsed with overwhelming power, but with a quiet, steady light like the stars above. The traveler had made his choice. He had chosen to use the knowledge of Atlantis not to rule, but to guide, to bring balance to a world that had been off course for far too long. As he began to walk, his footsteps leaving soft prints in the wet sand, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But the lessons of Atlantis were now his compass. The wisdom of an ancient civilization, once lost beneath the waves, would now live on in the hearts of those who were ready to hear it. In the distance, he could see the first signs of life, the rustling of trees in the wind, the flutter of birds in the sky. The world was awakening, just as he had, and he knew that the journey to heal the world, to bring about the balance that Atlantis had once lost, had only just begun. The traveler smiled to himself, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had sought the truth, and now he was living it. Atlantis was no longer a lost civilization. It was a story, a lesson, a legacy that had shaped him, and would continue to shape the world for generations to come. And as he walked toward the future, toward a world that was both ancient and new, he knew that Atlantis, in all its glory and its downfall, had given him the greatest gift of all, the understanding that power, when used with wisdom, could transform the world for the better. With one last glance at the ocean, the traveler took a step forward, his journey far from over. But now, with the knowledge of Atlantis guiding him, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The wind was soft and gentle, carrying the scent of salt water and distant shores. A young traveler, who had spent his life chasing the mysteries of ancient civilizations, now found himself at the edge of the world, beneath a sky painted in hues of deep violet and gold. The calm waves of the sea whispered secrets that only those willing to listen could truly hear. As the traveler sat on the soft, cool sand of an isolated beach, he looked out at the horizon where the endless ocean kissed the sky. The rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore was hypnotic, lulling him into a state of deep relaxation. His mind wandered back to stories he had read as a child, stories about a place lost in time called Atlantis. Was it real? Or was it just the stuff of dreams and myth? He closed his eyes, letting the gentle breeze play with his hair, and slowly drifted into a tranquil sleep. The ocean's song seemed to beckon him, pulling him into a dream where time no longer existed. In this dream, he was no longer just a curious traveler. He was a witness, transported to an ancient world, one that had vanished into the depths of the ocean, leaving behind only legends and unanswered questions. The sky around him shimmered, and the sound of waves intensified. Slowly, a shape began to form on the horizon, a great city, bathed in the light of a setting sun. The traveler's heart quickened. Was this Atlantis? He couldn't tell. The city was unlike anything he had seen in his travels. Towers of crystal and gold rose high into the sky, their tops disappearing into the clouds. The streets were lined with grand structures, adorned with intricate carvings, depicting gods and creatures from distant realms. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, and the distant hum of music and laughter echoed through the air. The traveler stepped closer, feeling as though he had been here before, in another lifetime. He could hear the voices of the people, their words strange yet familiar. They spoke of a time when their civilization had reached the peak of its power. They spoke of wisdom passed down through generations, of discoveries that had changed the world, and of a golden age that seemed unshakable. But there was a shadow that hung over them, a secret. Whispered among the elders, something dark that would one day bring it all crashing down. As he wandered through the streets, the traveler saw a grand library, its doors wide open. Curiosity tugged at him, urging him to enter. Inside, he found endless shelves filled with scrolls and books, some of them ancient, beyond comprehension. He reached for one, its pages yellowed with age. As he unrolled the scroll, a map unfolded before his eyes, detailed and precise, showing the very city he was standing in, along with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a hidden meaning. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Do you seek the truth?" the voice asked, soft yet commanding. He turned to see an old man, his robes flowing as though they were made of water. His eyes, deep and wise, met the traveler's gaze. Atlantis, the old man continued, was not just a city. It was a symbol of the height of human achievement, a place where knowledge and power coexisted in harmony. But such greatness, like the ocean itself, can be treacherous. The traveler nodded, his heart racing. The map in his hand seemed to glow brighter. He felt as though he were on the verge of something monumental, something that could change everything he knew about history. But the old man's words lingered in the air, like a warning carried by the wind. "Do you want to know what happened to Atlantis?" the old man asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you ready to hear the truth?" The traveler, feeling as though he had no choice but to follow the call of the sea and the whispers of the ancient city, nodded. The old man smiled, his expression both kind and sad. "The truth is not what you expect," he said, "and the journey to uncover it will not be easy." With that, the traveler felt the world around him begin to shift. The beautiful city of Atlantis blurred and dissolved into mist, leaving behind only the sound of the waves and the call of the ocean. He was no longer in the city of legends. He was back on the quiet beach, the warmth of the sand beneath him grounding him to the present. But the feeling of the dream lingered, and with it, the question: was Atlantis real? What was the true story behind its rise and fall? As the night grew deeper, the stars above twinkled like distant fires. The traveler lay back on the sand, his mind alive with questions. In the distance, the ocean whispered once more, and he knew that the journey he had begun in the dream would soon become a waking reality. The story of Atlantis was far from over, and it was time for him to uncover the truth. The moon hung high in the sky, its silvery light casting long shadows across the tranquil shore. The soft whisper of the ocean seemed to call to the traveler again, pulling him back into the dreamlike state from which he had awoken. The questions that swelled in his mind about Atlantis still lingered, like the echo of an ancient song. Was Atlantis truly a city of power and wisdom, as the old man had suggested? What had caused it to disappear? And why, after all these years, was the world still so fascinated with its myth? As the traveler closed his eyes once more, the world around him seemed to dissolve, and a new scene unfolded before him. He was no longer lying on the soft sands of the beach. He stood at the edge of a massive city, one that stretched far beyond. The horizon, towering walls, crafted from gleaming white stone, surrounded the metropolis. Beyond them, spires of gold and crystal reached toward the sky, their surfaces catching the sun's rays and reflecting them across the land. The entire city seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, a beacon of civilization's highest achievements. This was Atlantis in its prime. The air was alive with the sound of voices, laughter, music, the hum of 1,000 conversations, all blending together. The streets were wide and paved with marble, shining in the light of the setting sun. Temples to gods long forgotten stood tall, their intricate carvings depicting scenes of celestial beings and epic battles between the forces of light and darkness. The traveler marveled at the beauty of it all, feeling as though he had stepped into a forgotten dreamer, place untouched by the ravages of time. But it was more than just the architecture that struck him. It was the people who radiated, an aura of peace and prosperity. Everywhere he looked, men and women of all ages and walks of life seemed to move with purpose, their faces calm and content. The children played in the streets, their laughter echoing in the air. The marketplace bustled with activity, vendors selling everything from fine silk to rare spices, while artisans worked on masterpieces that would be admired for generations. The traveler felt as though he had entered a kingdom that knew no suffering, no war, no poverty. It was a utopia, a society that had achieved the impossible, perfect harmony between nature, man, and the gods. But as he walked deeper into the city, he sensed something beneath the surface, a quiet hum of tension that seemed to linger in the air just out of reach. It was subtle, like the faintest breeze before a storm, but it was there, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He soon found himself standing before a grand palace, its gates open wide, inviting him to enter inside. The atmosphere was one of quiet reverence. The walls were lined with murals depicting the history of Atlantis, its rise from humble beginnings to become the most powerful kingdom the world had ever known. The traveler marveled at the depictions of Atlantis leaders, their faces noble and wise, their expressions filled with the weight of their responsibility. At the heart of the palace stood the throne room, a vast chamber with high vaulted ceilings, and walls adorned with precious metals and gemstones. At the far end of the room, upon a raised platform, sat the ruler of Atlantis, the great king. His presence was magnetic, and the traveler couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he gazed upon him. The king was an imposing figure, his robes of pure gold shimmering in the light. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to see through the traveler, as though he knew every thought and secret that lay hidden in his heart. The king rose from his throne and walked toward the traveler, his footsteps echoing in the grand hall. "Welcome, visitor," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "You have come to witness the greatness of Atlantis, the pinnacle of civilization. But there is more to this city than what meets the eye. A great power lies beneath the surface one, that has the potential to bring either salvation or destruction." The traveler, intrigued and drawn to the king's words, stepped forward. "What do you mean?" he asked. The king's gaze grew distant, as though he were looking far beyond the walls of the palace, into a future that had not yet come. "We are a people blessed with knowledge and power beyond measure," he said. "Our scholars have unlocked the secrets of the stars, our engineers have harnessed the forces of nature, and our cities are marvels of art and science. But with all this power, we have forgotten one thing: balance." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "The gods have warned us. They have given us a gift, but they have also placed a burden upon our shoulders. The power we wield can save us or it can destroy us. The very things that make us great may also be our downfall. It is only a matter of time before we must face the consequences of our actions." The traveler felt a chill run down his spine. The king's words were filled with a sense of foreboding, a warning that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the heart of the city. The rise of Atlantis, the king continued, was not a simple thing. It was not a blessing that came easily. We fought wars, faced betrayals, and lost much along the way. But through it all, we persevered. We reached the stars, built wonders that will stand for millennia, and created a society that is the envy of the world. But now, the king's voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. We must ask ourselves, at what cost? The traveler's mind raced as he tried to understand. What was the king trying to say? Could the greatness of Atlantis truly have a dark side? Was the city's power and prosperity built on something more than just wisdom and achievement? As the king turned away, the traveler noticed something else in the throne room. A small, unassuming object sitting upon a pedestal at the far end of the room. It was a crystal, glowing softly in the dim light. The traveler was drawn to it, as if it were calling to him. "Do not touch it," the king said sharply, his voice filled with urgency. "That crystal is the heart of Atlantis. It is the source of our power, but it is also the reason for our downfall. We have relied on it for far too long, and now we must face the consequences." The traveler took a step back, his heart pounding. In his chest, the room seemed to close in around him, and the city outside grew silent. The weight of the king's words hung heavy in the air. "What will happen to Atlantis?" the traveler asked, his voice trembling. The king's eyes darkened, and he turned away from the crystal. "That," he said quietly, "is the question we must all answer. But in the end, it will not be the gods who decide our fate. It will be our own choices that will determine whether Atlantis lives or falls." As the traveler gazed at the crystal, he felt a strange sense of dread. The beauty of Atlantis, its grandeur and wisdom, was undeniable. But now, he understood that beneath its shining surface lay a dangerous secret of power that could either elevate the city to new heights or bring it crashing down into the depths of the ocean. And with that thought, the scene around him began to fade. The grand palace, the towering spires, and the kingle of it dissolved into mist, leaving only the whispering waves of the ocean in his ears. The traveler awoke once again on the quiet beach, the rhythmic sounds of the waves lapping against the shore accompanying his breath. The dreamlike haze that had enveloped him felt almost too real, like a memory trying to push through the veil of time. His mind was flooded with the images of Atlantis, its beauty, its wisdom, and the ominous warning of the king. The question lingered, more pressing now than ever. What had happened to Atlantis? How had such a magnificent civilization fallen? As he lay there, gazing up at the stars, the ocean seemed to whisper once more. The traveler felt a pull, an invitation to step deeper into the mystery. Without hesitation, he closed his eyes and Let the ocean's voice carry him away once more. When he opened them, he was no longer on the beach. He found himself once again standing in the heart of Atlantis. But this time, the city was different. The streets were empty, the once vibrant marketplaces now silent. The grand buildings, once shining with gold and crystal, now stood dark and cold, their surfaces cracked and weathered. The air, which had once been filled with the sounds of life, was now eerily still. The faint hum of tension that the traveler had felt before was no longer subtle, it was palpable, like the tension before a storm. As the traveler walked through the deserted streets, he felt a heavy weight on his chest. The beauty of Atlantis was fading, and in its place, he sensed something darker, a sense of fear, of regret. The city had once been a symbol of human achievement, the pinnacle of civilization. But now it was a place of silence and decay. He made his way to the palace, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The grand doors, once open to welcome visitors, were now shut tight, as though the palace itself was hiding something. With a push, the doors creaked open, revealing the throne room now empty, the throne at its center gathering dust. The glowing crystal that had once radiated power was dim, its light now faint and flickering. The king was not there. The traveler's heart sank. He had come seeking answers, but the city seemed to hold only questions, none of which had an easy answer. He wandered deeper into the palace, his eyes drawn to a group of elders sitting in a circle. Their faces were grave, their eyes filled with sorrow. The weight of the years, the burden of their choices, was written in every wrinkle, every furrowed brow. One of the elders, a woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, looked up as he approached. Her gaze was both kind and weary. "You have come to see the truth," she said softly. "But be warned, truth can be a heavy thing to bear." The traveler nodded, his heart racing with anticipation. "What happened to Atlantis?" he asked. "How did such a great civilization fall?" The elder sighed deeply, her eyes turning to the dimmed crystal in the throne room. "Atlantis was once a beacon to the world," she began, her voice low and filled with sorrow. "We were a people blessed with knowledge, power, and peace. But we were also blinded by our own greatness. We believed that nothing could touch us, that we were invincible. But power unchecked is a dangerous thing. It corrupts the heart, distorts the mind." She paused, her gaze distant, as though recalling a long-buried memory. "For centuries, we thrived. We built cities that touched the sky, created technologies that surpassed even our wildest imaginations. We spoke with the gods, learned from the stars, and unlocked the secrets of the earth itself. But in doing so, we became arrogant. We began to believe that we were above the natural order, that we could bend the world to our will." The traveler listened intently, his heart heavy with the elder's words. He could feel the weight of their truth, like the turning of an ancient wheel. "And the crystal," he asked, "what role did it play?" The elder's eyes darkened. "The crystal was the heart of our civilization," she explained. "It gave us power beyond measure, allowing us to harness forces that would have been unimaginable to any other people. But it also held a terrible secret. It was a gift from the gods, yes, but it was also a curse. The crystal's power came at a cost. It drew from the very earth itself, draining the life from the land. As we relied more and more on it, the earth began to weaken. Our crops began to fail, our rivers ran dry, and the land itself began to wither." The elder's voice trembled as she spoke. "But the worst part, The worst part was that we didn't see it. We were so consumed by our ambition, so blinded by our own power, that we didn't realize the destruction we were causing until it was too late. The gods had warned us, but we ignored them. We thought we could control the crystal's power forever. The traveler felt a cold chill settle in his bones. What happened next? He asked. The elder's face grew even darker, and she lowered her gaze. The land turned against us, she whispered. The earth that had once sustained us, that had once allowed our civilization to flourish, now began to rebel. Earthquakes shook our cities, fires ravaged our fields, and storms tore through our homes. The crystal, which had once been our salvation, became the very thing that led to our destruction. It consumed us from within, and the gods, turned their backs on us. The traveler's heart sank as he looked around the throne room. The once grand city of Atlantis, filled with the echoes of its former glory, now stood on the brink of collapse. The crystal, its glow flickering like a dying star, seemed to symbolize the very heart of the civilization's demise. And then, he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The elder's voice was soft, but resolute. The end came quickly. The skies darkened, and the seas rose, swallowing the land that had once stood so proudly. Atlantis sank beneath the waves, lost to history, its secrets buried in the depths of the ocean. But even as the city fell, the people did not give up. They fought to the end, trying to preserve the knowledge and wisdom they had accumulated, but it was too late. The traveler stood in silence, the weight of the elder's words pressing heavily on his chest. He could feel the city's sorrow, the collective grief of a civilization that had once reached for the stars, only to fall into darkness. Atlantis, a city of wonders and wisdom, had been destroyed not by outside forces, but by the very power it had embraced. The elder placed a hand on the traveler's shoulder, her touch warm and comforting. "You must understand, young one," she said. "The fall of Atlantis was not just the fall of a city. It was the fall of an idea belief that we could control the world around us without consequences. We thought we could master the forces of nature, but in the end, nature mastered us." As the traveler looked around at the crumbling remnants of Atlantis, he felt a deep sense of sadness. But there was also something else, something that lingered in the air like a faint hope. Atlantis had fallen, yes, but its story, its lessons, would live on, waiting to be discovered by those who were willing to listen. And as the traveler stood in the ruins, the faint sound of the ocean's waves began to carry him away once more. Back to the present, back to the quiet beach where it had all begun. But this time he knew the truth. The story of Atlantis was not just a story of loss. It was a story of caution, of hubris, and of the consequences of unchecked power. The traveler awoke once again on the familiar, quiet beach, the sound of the ocean whispering in his ears, the vivid images of Atlantis, the grandeur of its city, the power of its crystal, and its eventual fall still lingered in his mind like a distant dream. He could still feel the sadness and the sense of loss that had pervaded the ruins. But even amidst the sorrow, there was something else, something that seemed to call to him from the depths of the ocean. The whispers of the sea seemed to echo louder this time, like an invitation to uncover the secrets that Atlantis had left. Behind, the traveler stood up, his feet sinking slightly into the soft, warm sand, and turned toward the water. The gentle waves shimmered under the light of the moon, their rhythms steady and soothing, as though urging him to take the next step. In his journey, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs. And as he exhaled, the world around him began to shift once again. The sound of the waves grew louder, and when he opened his eyes, the scene before him was no longer the peaceful beach. Instead, he stood at the edge of the vast ocean, its depths, dark and mysterious. In the distance, he could see the faint outline of a city, a silhouette rising from beneath the waves. It was Atlantis, but this time the city was different. It was no longer the grand, shining metropolis he had seen in the past. It was submerged, half buried beneath the ocean, its once proud structures now lying in ruins beneath a blanket of seaweed and coral. The crystal spires that had once reached for the sky were now shadowy forms beneath the water's surface, their glow long extinguished. The streets, once bustling with life, were now eerily still, the remnants of the city's former glory now part of the deep blue world that had swallowed it whole. The traveler stepped closer to the edge of the water, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the city he had seen before, live with energy and power, was no more. It had been consumed by the very ocean that had once provided its bounty, and now it lay forgotten, buried beneath layers of time. Yet, despite the decay and the silence, the traveler felt a sense of urgency, as if something important, something that had been hidden for centuries, still lay beneath the waves. Waiting to be discovered, he glanced around and noticed an object half buried in the sand at his feet. He bent down and picked it up, feeling the coolness of the smooth, polished stone in his hand. It was a small, intricately carved tablet, its surface worn by time and the elements. The symbols on the tablet were unfamiliar, but there was something about them that felt ancient, as though they held the key to a secret long-buried dot. As he studied the tablet, he could hear a soft voice, like a whisper carried by the wind. The voice spoke in a language he didn't understand, yet somehow he could sense the meaning behind the words, as if they were being imprinted on his very soul. The truth of Atlantis, the voice said, lies beneath the surface, waiting for those who seek it. The knowledge of our people, the legacy we left behind, is buried in the depths. But beware, for to uncover it is to awaken something that has slept for centuries.